Well, hey there, and welcome back to Heimler's History. Now, in the last video, we started Unit 7 of the AP U.S. History curriculum, and in this video, we're going to keep right on going in Unit 7, and that means it's time to talk about the Spanish-American War. So, if you're ready to get them brain cows milked, let's get to it. So if we're going to talk about the Spanish-American War, we need to begin by remembering what we learned in the last video, namely that there was a whole group of American industrialists and politicians eager to expand an American empire. And so one of the territories they very much wanted to acquire was Cuba. Now, Cuba at this point was a Spanish imperial colony, and in 1895, Cuban nationalists renewed their struggle against Spain, but as it turned out, the Spanish crushed the rebellion. Now, what does that have to do with America? Well, here's where I introduce you to yellow journalism. Now, this was a group of journalists competing with each other for greater and greater readership under the competing leadership of Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst. And the way they tried to get people's attention was by publishing increasingly sensational stories that danced on the outer edges of truth and responsible journalism. Now, these yellow journalists began publishing stories which exaggerated the atrocities committed by the Spanish against the Cubans, and as people read about this, they came to the conclusion that America must intervene in Cuba because it was the only humanitarian thing to do. Now, historians debate how much influence yellow journalists actually had in the ensuing conflict, but everyone agrees that it was at least some of the influence. So now that the American public was riled up over Spanish atrocities, the U.S. established a naval presence in the island, and in 1898, one of those American battleships, the USS Maine, exploded in Havana Harbor, killing over 200 Americans. Now, before any investigation was begun on the causes of the explosion, yellow journalists jumped all over it like a hungry man on a Christmas ham. They claimed that the explosion was ignited by the Spanish because of the resentment of U.S. interference in the region. Now, to be clear, when the investigation was done, the explosion was found to be accidental, like not caused by any bad actors. But such due diligence didn't matter to folks like Pulitzer and Hearst, who saw these outrageous headlines as a way to sell more newspapers. So President McKinley issued an ultimatum to Spain: back off or we go to war. And Spain agreed with the demand. That was not what I was expecting. Can we still declare war on Spain? All right, let's do it. Thus began the very short Spanish-American War, which America won, and that victory launched the United States right into the imperial game. Now, to be clear, the war itself was not really that important, but its effects were all out of proportion to the war itself. So let's deal with some of the effects of the war. Let's begin with the fate of Cuba. The country did gain independence as a result of the war, but that independence was severely qualified by something called the Platt Amendment. American politicians insisted that this little amendment be inserted into the Cuban Constitution, and it allowed the U.S. to intervene militarily in Cuba if American economic interests were threatened. And that made it extremely difficult for the new Cuban government to conduct its own foreign policy and manage its foreign debts in a way that benefited their own interests. So it was kind of like Empire Light for the United States. But we go full-on empire with another effect of the Spanish-American War, namely the annexation of the Philippines from Spain. Now, before the war was even over, Assistant Secretary of the Navy Theodore Roosevelt sent that new shiny navy built on the imperialist ideals of Alfred Thayer Mahan right into the Philippines and began bombarding the Spanish fleet stationed there. From there, they allied with Filipino nationals and mounted a land invasion that ended in the overthrow of Spain. And so in that treaty that ended the Spanish-American War, the Philippines was ceded to the United States for $20 million. Now, the Filipinos themselves somehow got the notion that the United States was intervening in this whole mess to help them achieve independence, but it soon became clear that this was not the case. They just traded one imperial power for another. And that situation was untenable to the Filipinos, who gathered under the leadership of Emilio Aguinaldo to throw off U.S. rule. And this war lasted 3 years, with more limited conflict stretching out for 10 years. But in the end, the U.S. held on to the Philippines until after World War II. And now we got this empire train humming, baby. But here's the problem with the Philippines. It's really far away. You know, if only America, with all of its newfound enthusiasm for empire building, could find a set of islands in the Pacific that was roughly halfway between— oh, there it is, it's Hawaii. Now, I mentioned in the last video how American settlers had overthrown Hawaiian monarch Queen Liliuokalani in 1893, and so with the Philippines squarely in the American pocket, the annexation of Hawaii occurred in 1898. Now, these weren't the only territories gained by the victory of the Spanish-American War, but these will serve as good enough examples to illustrate the expansion of American empire. Now, now we need to move on to American empire through economics, and here we get to talk about the open door policy with China. Now, if you'll remember your world history, you'll recall that the 19th century wasn't the best for the Chinese. Like, due to superior industrial strength of the European nations, China was essentially taken over, not politically, but economically, and carved up into European spheres of influence. So President McKinley's Secretary of State, John Hay, saw America's economic opportunities in China quickly disappearing and therefore decided to act. Hay sent what was known as the open door note to the European powers in China, asking them to observe an open door of trading privileges in China. Now, the European powers didn't pay it much attention, but they didn't really reject it either, so Hay marked that down as a victory. And as a result, America held on to some of its trading rights in that highly desired Asian market. Okay, so those are some of the effects of the Spanish-American War, which led America to get its big boy empire pants on and tramp out onto the world stage. Alright, if you need more help on Unit 7, here's the playlist right here. If you need more help getting an A in your class and a 5 on your exam in May, then you can find a review packet right here. And lastly, if you want to expand the Heimler's history sphere of influence in the AP U.S. history world, then go ahead and subscribe, and we will watch the empire grow. Heimler out.